There's no crying in baseball, at least not when the baseball is this good. It's Baseball Stars on NES Works episode 136. Baseball Stars from SNK may be yet another baseball game for NES, but it's a baseball game for NES with a difference. It's a baseball game for NES made by people who actually care. Don't get me wrong. Lots of game developers on Famicom cared, even the teams who were tapped to churn out yet another mediocre knockoff of Family Stadium. But then, perhaps even more than now, the degree to which developers were allowed to care by publishers tended not to match the actual developers' enthusiasm for the subject and their desire to create a good and interesting piece of software. How much personal passion can you invest into a rubber-stamped product that you get to work on for 4 weeks? Not a hell of a lot, it turns out. Hence the seemingly endless deluge of middling to bad baseball games for NES. Here, hop over to Crontendo and check out the Famicom's 1986 through 1989 lineup. It'll only take you 30-40 hours. I'll wait. Back? Great. As you can see, the Famicom had a lot of baseball games. The genre was pretty non-existent for the console's first few years of life. You basically had Nintendo's own game from December 1983 and nothing else. Then, fully 3 years later, Namco published Pro Yakyu Family Stadium, RBI Baseball for us Yanks, and promptly set off a wave of imitators. Or rather, that game's sales promptly set off a wave of imitators. Famista sold more than 2 million copies. A big number that becomes even more impressive when you realize that it racked up those numbers after the initial Famicom boom of 1984 to 85, when seemingly any mediocre piece of crap voided from the opportunistic bowels of some random fly-by-night software house had even odds of cracking 7 figures. Speaking of fly-by-night, about half a year after Famista, Jaleco published Bases Loaded, aka Moero Pro Yakyu. While well-regarded in the US, Bases Loaded's initial Famicom release was the very definition of slapdash, featuring a cool visual patina over some unforgivably buggy code. Which didn't stop that one from selling in the millions too. RBI Baseball and Bases Loaded proved the ideal games for publishers in pursuit of quick, easy cash to imitate. After all, an adaptation of baseball didn't require any real time for concepting new ideas. It's a real sport after all, so developers just had to slap together some code that worked like the actual thing, put a little visual effort into the design to avoid looking too obviously like Namco and Jaleco's games, and hey presto. Famicom's baseball boom began in earnest in late 1987, right around the same time that the role-playing genre exploded as well. Whether Famista clones or Dragon Quest clones, players were spoiled for choice when it came to second-rate games about little stubby people following in the footsteps of the bestsellers. But yeah, in the same way that all of those Famicom RPGs were just Dragon Warrior but worse, baseball games on Famicom were generally just Famista but worse, with the occasional Bases Loaded but somehow even jankier to spice things up. We really only saw the cream of the crop here in the US, and considering that we had to suffer through Atlas and LJN's Major League Baseball, that should tell you everything you need to know about the state of the Famicom baseball machine. Baseball Stars stands out from this crowded, horrible field by virtue of actually doing new and different things, and by clearly having been a product that publisher SNK invested some real effort into. At first glance, you could be forgiven for writing it off as Famista but with better proportions. In action, however, Baseball Stars reveals its distinctive nature from the moment you power on your console. The opening menu screens present you with options that players had never before seen in a console baseball sim. Yes, sure, the selections for league play and versus at the top of the screen are business as usual. Solo and multiplayer games, no big deal. But look at those other options. Trade and hire players? Make a team? Fire players? What could all of this mean? It means that the sickos at SNK went and created a proper major league simulation. No, not the actual major leagues. You won't find a real licensed player or team anywhere in Baseball Stars. But frankly, that just makes it better. Baseball Stars demonstrates how stifling professional licenses can be to a game's design with the immense amount of freedom and player control it offers. You can do things here that would make the Players Association vomit with disgust. I mean, there's a hidden option to field a team of women. It's taken MLB The Show until this year to get around to offering that feature, with all its attendant chud whining and complaining.
Pathetic.
Not only did stars let you put icky girls in the field to demonstrate that there's no crying in baseball, only stats, it didn't strictly segregate the women into their own league. Through the magic of trades, you could create a cool, progressive, co-ed team. In fact, you could create pretty much any team you wanted. Or you could just stick to the 8 preset teams, each of which had their own distinct personalities, despite not being tied to any recognizable major league entities. That includes one team of horror movie actors, and one team consisting of players who appeared to pay homage to legendary players of the past. The pre-ruled teams had their advantages, of course, not least of which being the fact that all of them are viable right from the outset of the season. But where's the fun in that? Much more interesting is the option to create your own team entirely from scratch. You begin by picking a specialization for your team. Base running speed, power hitting, effective fielding, that sort of thing. And then assemble an entire collective of players one by one. And then you follow them through their season, carrying forward their wins and losses, and steadily improving their abilities through victory. Or maybe you end up despairing of their chances at taking home the pennant, and progressively swap out the players through trades, as you can afford to recruit better players with your take at the ticket box. Yes, the sickos at SNK went and made a proper league simulation. This is not just a simple baseball game where you pick up and play 9 innings with your efforts to be forgotten once the power switch is off. Baseball Stars asks you to invest in your team, not just in terms of fake video game money, but also in terms of time and emotion. It really wants you to get in there and play an entire season, following your little guys and girls from rookies to riches. And it can afford to make this demand of you by offering you the option to save your progress with a battery backup. Yes, those lithium batteries were in high demand here in 1989. First Ultima, then Nobunaga's Ambition, followed closely by Dragon Warrior and Baseball Stars. Now, you may notice that one of these is not like the others. Baseball Stars, being a simulation of a real-world sport, is the only one of these battery-backed releases not to have descended from the computer role-playing genre, making its save support almost as much of a swerve as its inclusion in Monopoly for Master System. Almost. But then, is Baseball Stars really not descended from the role-playing game? Sure, you're hitting sliders instead of slimes, and your weapon of choice is a bat rather than a wooden club, but what is a team, if not a party or a guild? And what are player stats, if not just character skill attributes focused on at-bat capabilities rather than combat abilities? What I'm saying is that Baseball Stars deftly combines those towering twin trends of the Famicom, baseball games and Dragon Quest clones, in a way that feels organic and natural, rather than doing something dopey like creating a role-playing game where your main character wields a baseball bat, which of course would be stupid as all get out. SNK didn't invent the idea of video games tracking player stats and win-loss records over a long-term span of season play, of course. Those had been around for years on home computers. But those efforts, being for home computers, had more of the playing a spreadsheet vibe that we found with Nobunaga's Ambition. Baseball Stars had the benefit of playing out through full-screen console-style graphics, colorful and just cartoonish enough to get the idea across without sacrificing personality in the name of 8-bit realism. Fundamentally, the moment-to-moment play works more or less like Famista and its ilk, and therein lies the key innovation of Baseball Stars. It marries the visual appeal of an NES game to the complexity and depth of a computer baseball sim. On top of that, it largely hides away the spreadsheet stuff, allowing it to tick away beneath the surface so that players don't need to fret about it on the moment-to-moment basis. Certainly you can go full sim tracking here if you want, like Pokemon battling fanatics who would obsessively chart EV and IV stats across generations of monster breeding 20 years later, but you don't have to. You can approach Baseball Stars like a normal console baseball game, enjoying each game as a standalone experience, and reserving the cash tracking and player trades for the between times. It really stands out in hindsight as one of the NES's most elegant works. And this coming from someone who would rather have his toenails peeled off than have to spend time with a sports game. Baseball Stars prefigures the modern sports genre in a real way, taking the stat crunching and character growth of a Dragon Quest knockoff and translating it into terms like ticket sales and player prestige. The better your team performs, the better the crowd you draw. And even if your team kinda sucks, you can drop a big chunk of cash on a trade for a popular player, whose celebrity can help shore up your revenue despite your ongoing losses. The experience you earn through play causes your team members to grow in skill, and the card saves your progress after each game, unless it ends in a tie after 18 innings of stagnation. It's pretty great. Granted, none of this would matter a bit if Baseball Stars played like trash. A career mode in a bad baseball sim would be about as useful as, say, a 2-player mode in a crappy top-down shooter. But SNK had learned its lessons. This is the new SNK for NES, not the Micronix-powered early SNK for NES, and the studio continues its streak here of cranking out excellent renditions of well-trodden game concepts. Just as Guerrilla War gave us perhaps the best possible take on the top-down cooperative commando alike, Baseball Stars refines the digital sports sim into a, league of its own. Baseball Stars doesn't just introduce large-scale improvements to the baseball formula, it also tweaks the moment-to-moment action of the genre to be far friendlier to players. Look at its speed and precision compared to, say, baseball for Game Boy, where the act of fielding was more or less an act of guesswork as your tiny fielders trudged slowly across the field. Baseball Stars adds an element of automation back into the process of fielding, reminiscent of an earlier era of games. You know, the little stick figure games of the early 80s. It also adds a small element of realism to pitching and batting without getting bogged down by legalistic accuracy. For example, you more or less define the nature of a pitch before releasing the ball, unlike in games where you can cause the ball to veer wildly while in flight. You will definitely feel a bit overmatched in the early going, especially if you build a team from scratch. But that sensation gradually subsides as you get a handle on the mechanics and your team's in-game stats improve to match your own skill as a player. Unsurprisingly, Baseball Stars invariably tops most people's list of best NES games, unless they just hate sports games. But what kind of curmudgeonly misanthrope would do that? Anyway, SNK's efforts did not go unnoticed. Baseball Stars clearly did well enough to spawn several sequels, including some arcade iterations. Well, maybe that's underselling it. SNK created a Baseball Stars adaptation as an early title for its Neo Geo MVS arcade platform, a system designed around generic cabs capable of accepting interchangeable arcade boards. Baseball Stars Professional looked a hell of a lot better than the NES game, but it carried forward many core tenets of the NES release, including persistence. Although it lacked a proper career and trade feature, it took advantage of the MVS's memory card component to allow players to save games in progress and resume at a later date. Or, once the Neo Geo AES arrived and brought arcade ROMs into the home, it let them shift play sessions between console and coin-op spaces. A proper sequel arrived for NES the following year, and that would make its way to arcades via MVS and Neo Geo CD in due time as well. And finally, SNK's subsidiary, Saurus, produced two excellent portable takes on the series for the Neo Geo Pocket handheld. Well, more like one portable take that appeared in both monochromatic and color iterations. But I'll get to those soon enough in NGPC works. For now, we can simply admire the excellence of Baseball Stars for NES and lament the fact that the series fizzled out due to SNK's existential crises around the turn of the millennium. The move to league licenses across all genres of video game sports around the same time certainly didn't do any favors to looser, more freewheeling properties like this as well. But they can never take away from us the original NES game, which has gone down among 8-bit sports fans as the baseball equivalent of Tecmo Super Bowl, minus the yearly fan-made roster update patches, of course. After all, having other people put together your team for you in Baseball Stars would be missing the point entirely. Baseball Stars is another weird oversight for Nintendo Power. The magazine only gave it a small preview and a couple of tips entries for accessing the hidden content. You'd think it would have deserved more, but no. Next time on NES Works, there are 3 sides to every story, at least when that story is about cobras.